And really, we're in business. We want to be able to actually create revenue. Getting on a podcast isn't just for the sake of it. I won't go fully into our numbers, but I will tell you that it made a 5-figure difference on a monthly basis for her following that strategy.
Do you want to get more clients, want to sell easier your coaching packages, grow your following, and connect with coaches in a meaningful way in your niche? All of this is possible by being a podcast guest. And I'm super excited that Lisa is here today and she's showing us how to authentically cold pitch podcasts, even it's the first time being on a podcast. And Lisa, you don't have to sell me the idea on being a podcast guest. I have your template. I'm in your Facebook group. We talked about your offer already. But for those who are not 100% convinced or don't understand the possibilities of being a podcast guest, can you help us understand why it is such an amazing way to grow your audience?
I love this conversation, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it today, Robin. So when I think about podcasts and when I think about the number one lead generation tool that both myself and my clients use, it's podcasts. It's not necessarily getting on television, which sounds super cool. It's not necessarily being on Forbes.com or Oprah, which I know a lot of people think is sexy. But when you get on the right podcast in front of a qualified lead and they get to know your system and your process and your methodology, by the time they're booking a call with you, they're not tire kickers. They're legitimately interested in what you do. And I'll share one thing with you now, and we can do a little bit of math later on in the conversation. But typically, a person who listens to one podcast is on average listening to 8. So if you get featured on a handful of shows, know that someone who's interested in you is probably going to binge watch or binge listen to your content. And then you're going to start seeing way more qualified leads coming towards your calendar.
Yeah, for me, really the idea is if somebody already took the time to listen to you for 30 minutes or an hour, and they reach out, they already get an idea of what you're doing, and also selling very often becomes so much easier because they already understand the expertise that you have. So I'm actually curious, with the clients that you have been working with, what are some of the results that they have seen by being a podcast guest?
Okay, so I want to be mindful of respecting their privacy. So I'm not going to go too deep in the numbers, but I will tell you stories of two of my clients, Jennifer and Nora. So one of my clients, Nora, she is a preconception health coach. She is a yoga teacher and also a holistic nutritionist. But over the last year, she's actually transitioned into preconception health coaching, helping women who want to get pregnant. And I've pre-signed up for her program for later on this year. That aside, so as Nora was making this transition, we were chatting about potentially working together. She was saying, I'd love to be on podcasts. There's this one show that I listened to and fangirl over, Fertility Friday with Lisa Hendrickson Jack. I would kill to be on that show. But, I probably got to build my reputation. I could see if that happened in a year or two, I would be over the moon. And I was like, a year or two, no, we're going to dial that one back. So what was awesome with Nora, is we figured out her messaging really based around what is her offer. So again, she helps women get pregnant. So my cat's waking up in the background. We're going to have a visitor in a second. So what we started to talk about was her methodology, which is the 4R method to eating to get pregnant. She talks about, pardon me if I butcher this, Nora, to remove the bad foods, to replace them, to repair the gut, and to rebalance your hormones. I got him, actually. Thanks, Nora. So those are her 4Rs. And she looked into what are all the fertility podcasts that exist out there? What are all the preconception health podcasts, and she pitched that 4R idea to all about 20 of them. She pretty much got on most of them. So what was really awesome is now she's amplifying her message. She's talking about her process. And when people book calls on her calendar, they're repeating her 4R methodology to her. So number one, she's reaching her ideal client. Number two, she's building her name in the space. Every podcast host that she collaborates with and does an interview with is a new relationship that she has, a potential visibility partner, someone to go live within their group. So she's really elevating her own name within the industry now. And really, we're in business. We want to be able to actually create revenue. Getting on a podcast isn't just for the sake of it. I won't go fully into our numbers, but I will tell you that it made a 5-figure difference on a monthly basis for her following that strategy.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this cold pitch in a little bit, because this is really the key of actually getting on the podcast. But I'm actually curious, how did you come up with this strategy?
Interesting question. So I have a template called 7 Pillars of the Perfect Pitch. And for those of you who are just getting to meet me and know me today, I have been in PR and visibility from day one since I was 18. So there's literally nothing else that I know how to do career-wise. So my entire career is based around how do I make the ask for myself or my client to get featured on this platform, whether it's television, radio, magazines, podcasts, whatever the tool might be. So when you're pitching to a podcast, the number one thing, especially when it comes to a cold pitch, I actually almost even want to talk through the 7 pillars of the perfect pitch, skim through them so I can give you a structure to follow. So the first thing when you're reaching out to pitch a podcast, a really brief introduction about yourself and giving context. Hi, my name's Lisa Simone Richards, and I'm a PR and visibility strategist who works with online coaches who want to get seen everywhere. Succinct. Context. We know what box to put me in. Not, I've been doing this my whole life. I went to school at Western University in Ontario. We're not going into the life story. We're not going to the credibility builders yet. Just a brief introduction. The next things that I like to do are showcase familiarity with the show, and that this isn't just a cold pitch, and that I have some resonance with the show, and that I've done my research. Hey, Robin, I've been listening to your show for a few months now. 2 titles that really landed with me are Title Name A and Title Name B. Don't just pick the last 2 episodes that show up on iTunes, kind of lazy. Go back. What actually resonates with you? What would be interesting? And maybe even comment on something one of the guests may have said. Make some sort of reference so they know, oh, okay, this person isn't just copy and pasting and blasting it to a bunch of people. And literally just changing 4 things in a cold template pitch: the name of the person you're addressing it to, including the name of their show, and having reference to 2 episode titles. Those are the only 4 things that vary anytime I send a cold podcast pitch. Everything else is exactly the same, which is why it makes it easy for me to send 10 pitches in 30 minutes once a week to make sure I'm getting exposure. So I showcase some familiarity. I create a connection. If there's somewhere that I can drop in a compliment about the content that they're putting out there, of course I want to do that. These people are working really hard to get their content out to their audience, and who doesn't like a nice pat on the back or kudos? So again, that's going to create more of a bond, given that I'm some random person who's come out of nowhere. So what I also like to do is I'm about to make the ask and put forward the topic I would love to come on and talk about is I actually go through the detailed notes on iTunes that says, you know, the purpose of the show from the provider, a little bit of a description, because I want to make sure that I know what you care about doing for your audience, and I want to make sure this pitch ties in with this. I know that your listeners are on a mission to build their first online business, and I would love to be able to help them do that, showing them how to build the ABCs of visibility. So again, I'm tying back into something that really connects to the show. Then what I typically do is walk them through, hey, this is my idea that I have for your listeners. One thing, and I know I'm going real fast, Robin, feel free to slow me down or interrupt me, but I'm just on a train. Something I'm typically doing is I'll say, hey, this is my idea for a topic, and here are 3 things that your listeners would learn. And I drop them into bullet points. The reason I do this is because big blocks of text are overwhelming. Think about the person who's getting this email on their phone while they're in line at the grocery store. It needs to be skimmable and easy for them to go through. So I just share, this is my idea. Here are the 3 top takeaways that your listeners would have. Would this be of value? Let me know. P.S. If you want to get a sense of how I translate on podcasts, here are 3 episodes you can listen to me on. So what I've done here in this structure is shared why it's of value to the audience. The host who has never met me in their lives doesn't care that I have a 6-month program, doesn't care about my life history. They care about what's in it for their audience. So I always lead from a place of value. I want to make sure that regardless of if somebody works with me after listening to that episode, every single listener is going to walk away richer than they came. They're going to know something that's going to help them advance their business. So that makes my content way more attractive because it's not the Lisa show that I'm coming here to pitch. So I frame those takeaways. And also, you know what? People are inherently busy. If you pitch a show, say, hey, here are some links to other content that I've done. Here are places I've been featured. Not only does it elevate you, it's like, oh, this isn't Lisa's first rodeo. She's obviously been on shows before. So they're automatically realizing the learning curve with me is going to be way shorter. I know what I'm doing. Also, they don't have to spend their time going on Google typing Lisa Simone Richards podcast. I've taken away that friction. Click here, here, and here. And what's really cool is somebody who I send sent a cold pitch to last week got back to me within probably 48 hours saying, I love this idea. I can tell that you're familiar with my show. Thank you for including those 3 links at the bottom because it made me coming up with questions for you way easier.
Mhm, mhm. And when I first got in contact with you, what I really enjoyed is you didn't just talk about this magical bring value, but you really break this down into very specific steps. And I'm actually curious, apart from the pitch, are there some actions outside of the pitch that we can do to get a host's attention?
Oh, 100%. So there's one, remind me to tell you about the rating and review because sometimes I forget my train of thought. So hold me to that one. Oh, now I'm remembering that and forgetting the other thing I wanted to say. Can you repeat your question for me? I really don't want to lose that.
So one part is the cold pitch, but I'm wondering, are there other actions that we can do on social media, for example, or on their podcast with a review to get a host's attention and actually show them we are interested in promoting your podcast?
Okay, so let me go with the ratings and reviews thing because I'm kind of losing the other one that I had first. But one of the things that's going to make your cold pitch stand out, think about any time you listen to an episode. The host is always like, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It helps us to get more listeners on the show and it helps me attract higher quality guests. So when you're sending that cold pitch, before you do, leave a rating and review on iTunes. Take a screen grab of it. You can drop that into the pitch and say, by the way, I left you a rating and review on iTunes. And you know what that really does? It enhances the likelihood that they're going to reply. Even if it's a no, which it could be, nothing guarantees that we're going to get yeses. I probably get 1 out of every 4 podcasts that I reach out to. They're at least going to say, thank you so much. And maybe this isn't a fit, but you've opened up a conversation. So that's a really great way to stand out from everybody else who is sending a cold pitch and increase the likelihood that even if it's a no, the person is going to get back to you.
Yeah, and for me, it made such a difference because it emphasizes again the idea of we are here to promote their podcast and to help them grow their audience. And it's really this, I'm taking this action with no outcome guaranteed. It's just me promoting what you're doing. And for example, what I've been doing as well to get on some podcasts is I'm following them on social media and I've been responding to stories like crazy. So I want to be the weird person that responds to every story. So they start a conversation with me as well. So we have the pitch, we have some actions outside. Can you give us an idea of how can we actually find podcasts?
Okay, so this is a methodology that I love to teach because you're like, okay, great. Being on a podcast sounds like a great idea. I'm enrolled. How do I get started? Because where? So one of the strategies I like to teach is called Success Leaves Clues. And I encourage people to think, who is somebody who is a few steps ahead of you in your career that has something that you would like to emulate? To be clear, we do not copy, but we absolutely draw inspiration from because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So I might think of, and the example I always give is one of my good friends, Christina Nicholson. She is in PR and visibility as well. She has an agency. I do the coaching end of things. And I'll go on Google and I'll type in Christina Nicholson podcast to see where is she getting featured, because that already tells me that they're covering the topic of visibility and PR. I'm not going to have to try and push a boulder uphill to convince them to cover this topic. Maybe I'm just going to change the angle. So I'll start off by typing into Google Christina Nicholson podcast, and that'll start giving me the names of some shows that she's been on. And just with each of those show names, I'll just go onto iTunes, take a peek through the description, see if it's the right fit, and boom, that's a show that I can reach out to. And I can just keep following that strategy. If you just even came up with the names of 3 people who inspire you and you'd like to create a similar career trajectory to, and you Google their name plus podcast, I'm fairly confident you'll walk away from this with a list of 10 shows you could reach out to easily.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been doing, I've followed your advice and it really, really helped. And I looked how far back have been their episodes. And then I scrolled through and saw, is there something similar? So in one of the pitches that I actually did was, hey, I noticed this conversation with Matthew. So Matthew, if you're watching, I I've Googled you, and I saw it has been over 2 years that this podcast talked about high ticket coaching offers. So I mentioned this in my pitch. You talked about this, and it's almost 2 years since we have this topic. Are you interested in me covering this, or I would be honored to be a guest on this? I want to also make sure that people know about your podcast searching strategy, because that's in your Facebook group, and I will link it in the description below. And it's a super easy approach. Can you quickly tell us about this as well?
Yeah, so how I kind of follow that success leaves clues methodology. Okay,
Yeah.
so very briefly for everyone to follow along. So I told you how I think about someone who's a few steps ahead of me. Google Christina Nicholson podcast, and all of a sudden a list of shows she's been on come up. So I'll take that first titled show. Let's say it's the Robin podcast to make it easy. I'll go onto iTunes and I'll search the Robin podcast. I first look at a few columns. You'll see name, episode, release date, etc. First thing I look at is the release date. If this show hasn't released an episode since 2019, I don't need to spend any more of my time paying attention to it. So I always make sure that there are recently released episodes. The next thing that I do is scroll over to the left on the name or the description column to make sure they do interviews with people. Because if I don't see an interview with Lisa, with Robin, with other people, maybe it's a solo cast where the host just talks on the show, and I would look pretty silly pitching them, and it would show that I don't listen at all. So that's the next thing I look for. Then I go to the top where it says from the provider. Guys, I hope you're going to watch the replay on this and press pause so you can follow along and do it as well. I'll go through the from the provider description to actually make sure this show is a good fit for me. And once it's ticked those boxes, that's what I'll go ahead and send off the pitch. One of the things that I love to help people do is not only just find those first shows, but go down what I like to call the iTunes rabbit hole. So I found this one show that makes sense. It's a great fit for me. Lisa's going to be on the Robin show, fingers crossed. I'm going to send my pitch. What I do is then, while I'm on that same page, if you scroll to the very bottom, and this is why I recommend iTunes, everyone. Personally, I'm an Android user, but iTunes does this really well on the desktop version. I go to the very bottom of the page and it says listeners also subscribe to, and it will start bringing up other similar podcasts. So not only can I go down a Google rabbit hole of all the podcasts that Christina Nicholson has been on, but with every show I find, I can go to the bottom of the iTunes page and it'll give me other suggestions for similar shows. So I actually have one of my assistants do this for me. Every month I'm like, here are 5 names, go. And she'll send me back a list of 50 podcasts. She'll look up all the shows those 5 names have been on. Maybe she'll look up the names of the podcast hosts for those shows that the guests have been on to see what shows they've been on. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole. Then they go down iTunes. So for a few bucks a month, someone literally spoon feeds me a list of 50 shows. So every week I can reach out to 10. And like I said, it only took me 30 minutes earlier today.
Yeah, and I've been doing this, and it's in the beginning it sounds like a complicated process, but I promise you, you will get your first 20 leads for podcast in no time. So make sure that you're doing it. One of the issues that I have very often, and many of my followers, is time is tight and we want to get a little bit more support. And I think you have a new workshop coming out. Can you tell us about this?
Yes. So one of the things that I love to do for small business owners, coaches, and entrepreneurs is share with them different ways that you can get seen that don't involve growing slowly one by one on social media. So something I'm super excited to be hosting tomorrow, if you're watching live, otherwise on January 27th and 28th, and multiple times throughout the rest of 2022, I host a free 2-day visibility workshop. It's called the Get the Word Out workshop, and it's primarily for online coaches who want to get seen everywhere without spinning their wheels on social media or spending money on Facebook ads. What I teach in the 2-day training is how to get clear on your message, having a message actually attracts and hooks your ideal client. Then how do you find the right places to amplify this platform, whether it's getting on a live like this to be on YouTube, whether it's getting on a podcast, a Facebook Live, a guest training in someone else's mastermind, television, magazines. There are a bunch of different ways that you can access handfuls of your ideal clients without having to pay for that kind of access, leading with the kind of value that I talked about today. So for anybody who would like to join the free 2-day visibility training, it's at www.finallygetthewordOut.com. And Robin, I know you've probably already dropped a link to it.
I did. So it's in the comments and it's in the description if you're watching the replay. I have one final question from Gigi, and she's saying, what are your tips specifically if you cannot drop some links to previous podcasts?
You know what I would do then? Then I would take control of my own social media, and I might do an IG live talking to the topic I might want to put out onto a podcast. I might do a quick 2-minute video of, here are 3 tips to help you be able to ABC. So that way I could send that link over to a host and say, hey, to get a sense of my energy, here's a quick video I did on the topic. So it's always great when you can be on somebody else's platform. That really starts creating a certain level of expertise, authority, status. But if you're still in the stage of building that, no shame. Everyone started from somewhere. Thank goodness we have social media platforms where we can dictate and create our own content and lay them there as a foundation. Actually, one of my clients, Cher, she's a nutritionist and she wants to get on podcasts, and she started to do some pitching, but the truth is she hadn't been featured anywhere. And the host was like, I kind of need to know a little bit more about you before I say yes to you. So she was so active in creating her own content on Instagram, and she's doing reels and stuff now. Again, that's not what I do as my primary marketing strategy, but so the people who are going to do their research and give you a yes to access on their platform, she's taking that control into her own hands, and now she gets access to those other platforms. So she starts off mentioning her Instagram, but I'm sure within 4-6 weeks from now, she can reference other shows she's been on.